Meet Mobutu Sese Seko, the first and only president of Zaire, while his people lived without electricity, clean water, or health care. Mobutu paraded around in a leopard-skin hat worth $20,000, paired with an ivory cane even more expensive. He built a jungle palace with air conditioning in the 1970s, and even his own airport, just so a Concorde jet could land for him. Not very far away, there is his Ugandan counterpart, Idi Amin, also known as the Butcher of Uganda. He drives flashy Cadillacs with gold-plated guns inside. He wears a uniform with tons of fake medals. He has a few wives and is known for wild parties. And just like Mobutu, his own country is starving. But do you know what's another common thing between them? The money that fueled their luxury came straight from America, and that too at a time when inflation in the US was soaring.
Almost 1 out of 4 of our children lives in poverty.
When ordinary Americans were struggling to pay for gas during the oil crisis, when mortgage rates were sky high and many families couldn't even afford a home, when jobs were disappearing, factories were shutting down, and everyday people were lining up just to get basic necessities.
They see their parents receiving welfare checks. They don't see their parents going out every morning.
All while dictators thousands of miles away lived like kings on American money. Welcome to Sleuthing Scams, and today we will be talking about how the US scammed itself via Africa. It takes a lot of effort, time, and heart to compile all these stats and information to make a video for you, so kindly hit that subscribe button. The United States of America, the brightest, sharpest, and the most feared country on the planet, a nation known for bright minds, futuristic thoughts, and innovation. But hidden inside this rich history lies a mistake that still haunts America. A mistake that has cost Americans not millions, not billions, but over $1 trillion. And it all began in the 1950s, as African nations began breaking free from European colonial rule. America saw opportunity and risk. The Cold War was heating up, and Washington feared that newly independent African states might fall under Soviet influence. To prevent this, the US began rolling out ambitious aid programs. In 1958, the Mutual Security Act expanded American assistance overseas, including to Africa. By 1960, the Year of Africa, 17 nations declared independence. That same year, President Dwight Eisenhower created the Development Loan Fund, offering money for African infrastructure. Then came 1961, a turning point. President John F. Kennedy signed the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961, which created the United States Agency for International Development. Its mission was to deliver economic development aid across Africa. Kennedy also launched the Peace Corps in March 1961, sending young Americans to villages across Africa to spread American values, technology, and education. Billions flowed in, but while on paper it was meant to build schools, hospitals, and industries, in reality much of this money was swallowed by corrupt governments and dictators that the US backed for their anti-communist stance. Leaders like Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire, today's DRC, received enormous US funding throughout the 1960s and 70s, while his people remained in poverty. In the 1970s, aid shifted again. The US began pumping resources into African states with valuable minerals and oil, ensuring American access. In 1973, after the oil crisis, countries like Nigeria became central to US aid diplomacy. Once again, billions left US taxpayers' pockets, but most of it disappeared into the hands of African elites. The 1980s brought another layer. Under Ronald Reagan, the US used aid as a weapon in its proxy wars against the Soviets. In 1981, Reagan's administration increased military aid to African regimes, especially in places like Somalia, Sudan, and Angola, where civil wars were raging. US money funded armies and militias under the banner of fighting communism. But in practice, it fueled violence and instability. By the 1990s, after the Cold War ended, the US claimed it would shift toward humanitarian aid. Programs were launched to fight famine, such as during Ethiopia's crisis in 1984 to 85, and later to combat HIV/AIDS. But once again, most funds were poorly managed, with reports showing that less than half of aid ever reached the people it was meant for. During 1970 to 1990, the average income in Africa declined despite receiving around $600 billion in aid during this time period. But US was not ready to stop or even learn. Fast forward to the 2000s, President George W. Bush announced the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief in 2003, one of the largest health initiatives in Africa. By 2010, the US had spent over $46 billion fighting HIV/AIDS on the continent, yet critics argued that while lives were saved, the money also cemented dependency and empowered corrupt systems. By the 2010s, US aid to Africa had crossed $1 trillion cumulatively since the 1960s, and it clearly showed no signs on help to Africa, but instead made them poor. Between 1970 and 1998, the very years when aid to Africa reached its peak, poverty on the continent exploded, rising from just 11% to a staggering 66%. But America didn't stop there. Programs like Feed the Future, 2010, and security assistance for counterterrorism in the Sahel were rolled out. But the pattern stayed the same. America gave, elites pocketed, and ordinary Africans rarely saw lasting progress. Decade after decade, Washington believed it was buying influence, stability, and goodwill in Africa. Instead, much of that money vanished into corruption, war, and failed projects. And in the process, America scammed itself, spending trillions with little to show for it. Back in the 1960s, the average European was only 5 times wealthier than the average African. Today, despite Africa receiving billions in foreign aid, that gap has widened to 13 times. On democracy indexes, the continent consistently ranks at the bottom. The money that was meant to build roads, schools, hospitals, and power grids ended up funding dictators' wardrobes, luxury estates, and private jets. The tragedy isn't just that aid failed to improve lives. It actively empowered the very rulers who themselves were responsible for the brutal condition of Africa. With American aid pouring in, dictators no longer needed their citizens' taxes or votes. Their survival depended not on the people, but on Washington's money. And in that way, US aid didn't just fail Africa. It shielded its dictators and scammed America itself. Your suggestions and opinion means a lot to us, and it helps us learn and improve. So kindly share your thoughts in the comments, and do check out our latest video on Britain's current economic situation. Subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click the bell icon.